I'm so sick of running as fast as I can, thinking if I would get there faster if I was a man. Now, these are the words of billionaire, but at the time, multi-millionaire Taylor Swift, a woman who is more successful, more privileged, and has lived a better life than 99.9% of people to ever exist. Wondering if she would get there faster if she was a man.
Everybody, I introduce to you White Feminism. This is a real live lyric off of Taylor Swift's new album, The Tortured Poets Department. We would pick a decade we wish we could live in. Instead of this, I'd say the 1830s, but without all the racists.
And being as this is a woman who has been in the music industry since she was a teenager, I'm going to suffice that she didn't have to get it out the mud, okay? But this is what white feminism is. The most privileged women on the planet, the most privileged people on the planet, complaining that their existence isn't perfect.
Taylor Swift is never, ever, ever gonna beat the white feminism allegations. Because why has she done more to defend a fucking fellow millionaire, Lady Gaga, than she has to defend any woman of colour in her life, in her actual life? Feminism for her is literally just for people that look like me. And like, the moment that you admit that, the moment you will find true clarity. Fans that saved up hundreds, if not thousands, to buy her concert tickets are selling them to donate to Palestine because she won't. She won't. And she probably never will. Swifties for Palestine was literally trending on Twitter, begging, pleading Taylor Swift to fucking do something. Share a GoFundMe, post a donation link like all of the other celebrities are doing. And she chose to defend pregnancy rumours about Lady Gaga. Women don't owe you anything. Clap back. Shut the fuck up. I actually don't think she should speak on women's issues again. Women and girls in Gaza are literally being massacred. Women and girls in Gaza don't have period products. Women and girls in Gaza giving birth without pain meds. What about those women?
You see, the first wave of feminism was created by white women for white women. Now, what the modern day feminists will have you believe is that feminism has always been about the liberation of women, which factually just isn't the case. Now, let's look at two feminists. They're very important. Lucretta Mott and Elizabeth Sadie. These were two of the first feminists, and they tried to attend the anti-slavery convention. The men obviously said no, because this was the 1800s. What are you doing here? You're women. And you might be sitting back and thinking, well, they did try to enter the anti-slavery convention. This is a good thing. This is proof that they were about liberation. They've always been about equality. But what's interesting is that that event took place in 1840. But by the time feminists and women got the right to vote in the 1920s, feminists not only excluded lower class white women, so they were classes. It was middle class and upper class white women only. But they also made sure to exclude women of color. So the question then becomes, why did these women actually go to the anti-slavery convention if when they actually got the rights to vote, they excluded people of color? That doesn't make sense. Now look, was it the same women? No, it was 80 years ago. And this isn't how history works. But you would like to think that the feminist movement, if it was so progressive in 1840, that in 1920, it only would have got more progressive. No?
But perhaps, as you can gather from this photo here of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA, the movement had a pretty bad reputation for being exclusionary, not only in terms of women of lower economic class, but, well, race as well, as we can see from this photo. For instance, in 1918, NASA tried to persuade Southern states to ratify the 19th Amendment by appealing to fears of what would happen if the black vote were to ever surpass the white vote. NASA explicitly advocated that if the continuance of white supremacy in the South were to prevail, they must grant the vote to white women.
Well, that obviously wasn't the case. And the reason why I believe the feminists in the 1920s were racist and classist is because the feminists in 1840 were also racist and classist. They only went to the anti-slavery convention because they wanted their voices to be heard at the same sound frequency as white men, because that's what it's always been about for feminists. Them being equal to white men. Now, the white feminists have done something that's absolutely genius. They've convinced women that women's history is women's history. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because does that mean men's history is missing? It doesn't make sense on any level. Your history as an individual is very much dependent on where you came from. So a white woman's history will be different to a black woman's history, which will be different to an Asian woman's history. Now, will there be some things that they have in common? Of course, but it's not the same. And by lumping all women's history together, it only benefits one demographic of women. And that is white women, because then they get to be victims. You see, a lot of feminists don't know this, but white women own 40% of slaves. They also owned land and properties. But if women's history is women's history, why did white women own slaves, but black women never owned slaves? Why is that? Is that because historically white women have always had power?
So the misogyny and patriarchy has gotten so bad in South Korea that
white women need to chill the fuck out. Okay, I'm Korean American, so I wanted to not say anything about this, but I gotta say something. And nothing to this creator, I just stitched her. So I noticed a lot of, in my feed, I've been getting a lot of white women saying, oh, 4B movement in Korea, blah, blah, blah. Well, let me tell you, the 4B movement in Korea is nothing like the white feminism and the feminist movement in America. The cultural and the social systems and the family, how the families are run in Korea is nothing like how the families and the social structure is in America. White women have the most power, privilege, and freedoms of any women on this planet. And if you look at any relationships, as long as it's not an abusive relationship, that's a whole nother deal. But any normal relationships, if you look at it in America, women have the power. I would say white women have more power than the average white man in America. And when I see the white women trying to jump on this 4B movement, it's just like they're just trying to use women of color, like they've done historically. Historically, white women have always used women of color to get their agenda through and to get ahead, and then leave us behind. I've noticed the white women, the culture of white women in America tend to bash white men. That's because they want to be white men. They want the power, they want the money, they want the status.
But there are clearly gaps in history, gaps in which we don't speak about, because we know white women owned 40% of slaves. We know they owned land and property. But something happened. Something happened and we regressed. What was that? Was it war? That's what I believe. Because we know what comes with war, right? Or we know what came with war. The right to vote. The right to work. These so-called rights that feminists say men had over women. But what came with those rights was the fact that you as a man had no choice but to fight in these wars. Wars that were way more frequent than people would like to believe. Wars that the average working class, middle class man wanted nothing to do with and had nothing to do with, but he had to fight on behalf of his country, on behalf of the 1%. You see, I find it very hard to believe that the world looked at working as a privilege. When I'm from the UK, you know who's from the UK? The Queen. The face of the UK. The face of about 70 different countries. If working was a privilege, I find it very difficult to believe that the Queen wouldn't have granted women that privilege.
The day after Labor Day, let's talk about the labor movement and how it benefited you. Back in the 1920s, this used to be normal. Actual CEOs and leaders of industry thought this was okay. Many of these business moguls, who are still praised today, thought this was humane. And they saw no reason to change it until the labor movement. Henry Ford implemented the 40-hour work week on May 1st, 1926 in his factories, only after over 50 years of protest by the labor movement. So I simply share this to remind us that we should not be looking to our business leaders for solutions to a better workplace. We need to make it happen. You want a 4-day work week? Demand it. You want 5 weeks of vacation like they offer in Australia and Canada? Push for it.
I want to ask you guys this. If you could pick, you had to go back 100 years, 1924, and this is for everybody in the comments. Now, the only caveat being, you were born in whatever class you were born in. So if you as a man, you were born in 1999, and you were born working class, you'd be a working class man in 1924. What demographic are you picking? Because I know what I'm picking. My name would be Becky Elizabeth III. I would be a white woman, and there's no doubts about it. They'd be calling me Becky, I'll be hitting it. Becky, 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 Becky. But let's be serious for a second, right? Let's look at the environment in 1924. For women, you couldn't work. Your job was to stay at home with the kids, take care of the household. Men back in those days were more abusive. So it was more likely that as a woman, as a wife, you'd be getting some licks. As a woman, you're taught to have no real goals or ambitions because, again, you're a homemaker. And you're living in a world that was designed for men to be successful and breadwinners, and you're basically the sidekick. Now, let's look at the environment as a man. Now, if you're a man my age in the 1920s, you survived World War I. Congratulations. Mentally, what's going on in your head? I don't know. But being as we were sent from the future to the past, we know World War II is on the way. Congratulations. You will be fighting in that war. You work, but you work hard laborious jobs, long hours, poor working conditions. Jobs that are literally taking years of your life. And you have no choice but to work those jobs, because if you don't, your family will starve. And you know this, so all the pressure is on your shoulders. Now, when I look at the environment for both men and women, without feminism, I sit back and I go, man, that just sounds really bad for everybody involved. But because of feminism, now we have to compare. So again, you guys let me know. Would you rather be at home? Maybe you get slapped up a few times if you're unlucky. Or would you pick having to fight in multiple wars because of petty elites? Risking your life, seeing all sorts of madness, and you come back to shitty, hard jobs that you don't like just to provide for the family. You guys let me know. Because I don't even think it's a competition. But look, when you look at feminism holistically, the overall impact has been a net positive. There's no doubts about it. Women in the workforce, needed. Women being equal in the eyes of the law, needed. These things have vastly improved our quality of life, our quality of living, etc., etc. But let's be clear, there's only been one good wave of feminism, and that's the second wave. The first wave, a bunch of racist, classist white women, we don't really like those. Okay, and the third wave is where all the man hate came in. The second wave is the only good wave. And that wave came after greats like Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X had come and gone and fought for equality of all. And then the feminists tagged along, and it was unity, and it was fantastic, and it was great. But since then, feminism has just turned into a bunch of moaning, a bunch of crying, a bunch of BS, if I'm being honest.
When I was 8, I was confused being called bossy because I wanted to direct the plays that we would put on for our parents. But the boys were not.
These women have achieved nothing in years because there's almost nothing left to achieve, which is why you see them moaning and crying on the internet. That is literally all they do.
Hi, I'm Audrey, and I'm here to talk about men's incessant need to compliment women.
And the hatred and the misandry towards men from that third wave has carried on today and gotten 10 times worse. Which is why someone like me, I have no problem in speaking very harshly and candidly about feminism, because it is nonsense. Currently, did you guys know that feminism was built off the back of the Industrial Revolution?
First wave feminism essentially occurred simultaneously with the Industrial Revolution, about the late 19th century, in which women demanded equal economic, legal, social, and political opportunities.
So deep this. The West went to Africa, sucked the resources out of African countries. They went to India, sucked the resources out of India. For 300 years, millions of people died of starvation. They brought all that back to their countries in the West so their countries could grow, so white women could cry about not having credit cards.
A female has only been able to have a credit card without her husband's permission for within the last 50 years. So they had to pass laws to make that happen. It's wild. But
is that not the definition of privilege? And all this patriarchy talk, no demographic has benefited more from the patriarchy and from the monstrosities that the West has committed more than white women, and they never had to fight for it. That's true privilege.
Palestinian isn't an ethnicity, it's an ideology, and it's an ideology that colonialism gets a bad rap. Like genocide is bad, but colonizing places that are genocidal and they have bad ideology, it's good to come in and correct their views.
What do you think should happen to the people who are already in Gaza?
So I think that there's a couple of possibilities. The one that I think is the most realistic is we gotta ask other countries for help. I know that Spain was willing to take a couple of million. I know Russia said they would take a couple of thousand.
To a lot of people, that would sound like you're advocating for ethnic cleansing.
I don't think so, because Palestinian isn't an ethnicity, it's an ideology, and it's an ideology that says that they want Jews dead, and so we want them as far away from Jews as possible.
Baby, you do something to me. I can't lie, you got me. Baby, you do something to me. I can't lie, you got me. You're the one I want, you're the one I see, the one that's gonna be right beside of me. You're the one I want, you're the one I need, the one that's gonna be